I always wore lipstick to dinner. Even when it was just me at home, alone. Even when it smudged the rim of my wine glass or faded by dessert. It wasn't vanity, it was memory. Lipstick was the one piece of armor I never surrendered, a habit from younger, louder days. That evening I chose crimson, not soft coral or sensible mauve, the kind Kendall always wore. I chose a color that declared itself, that refused to be ignored. I smoothed it on in the mirror of the powder room, blotted once, then stepped into my son's perfectly curated dining room. Everything looked as it always did. Modern, quiet, intentional. Kendall's design style was impeccable and cold, like a showroom frozen in time. Her voice floated from the kitchen, directing Henry and Lily with efficient cheer. The table was already set, 3 wine glasses, a carafe of lemon water, cloth napkins folded like origami. "Dinner's ready," Kendall called out. I took my seat at the far end, where the lighting hit just right, where I didn't feel so shadowed. Lily sat beside me, already scrolling her phone. Henry poured wine like he always did, only half listening to conversation. Then Kendall walked in, carrying the roast, eyes darting around the table until they landed on me. And just like that, her mouth curled. She smirked, not a big one, just enough. "Wow," she said, tilting her head. "Someone's feeling glamorous tonight." I smiled gently, unsure if it was a compliment. She looked right at my lips, then chuckled. "She's a liability in lipstick," she said. The room stopped. Even the sound of the knife-slicing roast felt louder afterward. Lily glanced up, blinked, then looked away. Henry didn't say a word. He just adjusted his wine glass. And I felt something inside me curl back like singed paper. I didn't answer. I just pressed my napkin to my mouth, suddenly aware of how bright the color looked on white cloth. The rest of dinner passed in a muted blur. Henry talked about work. Kendall shared an anecdote about a client who didn't understand the difference between marble and quartz. Lily barely said anything, except to ask if we were done yet. I nodded along, chewed, swallowed. I couldn't taste a thing. I watched my hands, trembling, not from age, from restraint. Every word I didn't say hung in the air between us. Later, as Kendall cleared plates, she tapped my shoulder. "You didn't touch your dessert?" she said. "I wasn't hungry," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "Of course," I said, with the same smile I used when Richard forgot anniversaries, or when Henry forgot to call on my birthday. On the drive home, I watched the city blur past my window. Streetlights, neon signs, familiar routes that felt suddenly foreign. I kept my hands folded in my lap, fingers tracing the outline of my lipstick tube, still tucked in my coat pocket. Henry drove in silence for a long time before finally saying, "You know Kendall didn't mean anything." I didn't answer. "She just jokes like that." Still, I said nothing. When he dropped me off, he kissed my cheek and said, "Don't let it get to you." But I already had. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, still dressed, coat buttoned, shoes on. I stared at the full-length mirror across the room. The lipstick was still perfect. My reflection wasn't. I looked out of place in my own skin. I remembered other times, quiet glances between Kendall and Henry when I offered to help in the kitchen. The way Lily rolled her eyes when I asked about her school projects. How Kendall would always rest her hand on my arm while interrupting, saying, "Let me, Carol. You just relax. Relax. Fade. Disappear." I thought back to a family barbecue a few summers ago. I had worn a floral sundress, bright and flowing, and brought homemade potato salad. Kendall had smiled tightly and said, "Oh, we're mostly doing gluten-free and vegan now, but thanks." Then she placed it at the far end of the table where no one touched it. I remembered the moment clearly, how I'd laughed, pretending it didn't sting. How Henry said, "You know how Kendall is. She's modern." Modern meant streamlined. Streamlined meant people like me took up too much space. Back in the present, I removed the lipstick with a tissue and watched the red smear across the white like a wound. I left the tissue on the vanity. I wanted to see it there the next morning, not as proof of hurt. As a reminder, I saw it. I finally saw it. In that moment, something shifted, a boundary redrawn in silence. I would still attend birthdays. I would still answer the occasional call, but I was done performing, done trying to be palatable to people who had already decided I was past relevance. They didn't know it, Not yet, but something had ended over that dinner table, and something else had just begun. The front door clicked shut behind me, but the sound didn't bring comfort. It echoed, sharper than usual, like it didn't recognize me anymore. I stood in the entryway, keys in hand, coat still on, staring at the hallway I'd walked 1,000 times. But that night, it felt different, like I was stepping into someone else's home. I walked through each room slowly, living room, kitchen, den, each one staged in quiet order. The framed photographs on the mantel were perfectly dusted, but the smiles inside them looked like strangers. Holiday cards tucked in the basket by the fireplace. Henry's last birthday message. A store-bought card with "Love Ya Mom" written in the corner. No signature from Kendall. Not even a scribble from Lily. I pressed play on the answering machine, listening to 3 saved voicemails. Kendall's voice first. Bright, controlled. "Just reminding you your primary doctor changed networks. I'll text you the new info. Don't forget to confirm your meds." No greeting, no goodbye. Then Henry. "Hey. Been slammed at work. You good?" Then silence. I turned off the machine before the final beep. I sat down at the kitchen table. Noticed how still everything was. I used to fill this house with noise, music in the mornings, flour dust in the air, soup simmering on the stove, laughter from friends I haven't seen in years. Now it was pristine, silent, sterile, like me. I walked into the guest room, what used to be Lily's room when she was younger, before everything changed. The bed was neatly made, untouched since her last visit. A pale pink blanket folded at the edge. A row of forgotten books on the shelf. Lily. Charming. Brilliant. A teenager wrapped in velvet sarcasm and lip gloss. She used to call me Gigi, her eyes bright with mischief. But lately her smile had the same tilt as Kendall's. Her words too sharp for someone so young. During last month's visit, she'd said, "You always wear the same earrings, don't you?" It wasn't cruel. Not exactly. But I felt it. That flicker of comparison. That warning. She was watching me through Kendall's lens now, and Henry, my son, my once little boy who cried when he lost a crayon, he never challenged it. He stood back, always the peacemaker, the fixer. But in that passivity, something far more painful had taken root. He had let me become invisible. It hadn't happened all at once. Kendall had been sweet in the beginning, thankful, polite. She'd compliment my pie crust, asked for parenting advice. She said thank you a lot. But over time, that thank you turned into, "We've got it, and don't trouble yourself." And that's not really your place anymore. 1 inch at a time, she repositioned me in their lives. First, I was the babysitter. Then, the backup ride. Then, the holiday guest. Now, I was the afterthought. I opened my journal. The pages were soft from years of habit. I wrote slowly, each word deliberate. I became decor in my own family. The silence in the room wrapped around me. Not comforting, not peaceful, just vacant. The next morning, I walked past the kitchen and paused when I heard the voicemail light blink again. I pressed play. It was Kendall. I didn't expect to care. But then I heard the sound behind her voice. Muffled, but there. A second voice, hers again, speaking more freely, unaware the phone had already started recording. "She needs to be in assisted living," Kendall said, laughing quietly. "I mean, she wears red lipstick to dinner like she's auditioning for a role that ended 20 years ago." I froze. She continued. "I told Henry, eventually we'll have to do something. She's not helpless, but she's not helpful either. It's just dead weight, like managing a delicate antique. Looks nice, breaks easy." Then the call cut. I stood there, stomach folding inward, the room tilting just slightly. Dead weight. Delicate antique. Assisted living. Not in 10 years. Not if things get bad. But soon. Soon, because I no longer served the purpose I used to. Because I had stepped out of their frame. I turned off the machine, pulled the power cord from the wall. Everything was suddenly too loud. The humming of the fridge, the tick of the wall clock, the wind brushing the window pane. It was all screaming the same thing. You don't belong here anymore. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I went to the bathroom. Reached into the drawer and pulled out my lipstick. The same shade I wore the night she said it. I applied it with steady hands. No mirror. I walked back into the living room, looked at the family portraits on the wall, smiling faces in perfect light, and I said out loud to no one, "If I'm a liability, then I'll be the kind they regret underestimating." That was the moment something shifted again. A quiet resolve. A woman they thought was fading had just remembered how to burn. Before I was invisible in my own house, I was invisible in hers. My mother didn't yell. She didn't hit. She didn't drink or run away. No, she ruled by stillness. Sharp, expectant, unbending. Her love came in muted tones, folded laundry, clipped advice, an occasional squeeze of the shoulder if you'd done something particularly obedient. She was beautiful in a way that made you flinch, bone-thin, elegant, always pressed and polished. But she treated beauty like a burden. I remember once trying on her lipstick as a little girl. She caught me in the mirror and said, not unkindly, just flatly, "You'll get the wrong kind of attention if you lead with your mouth." That stuck with me. Like most things she said, warnings dressed as wisdom. She believed in silence the way some believe in prayer, as if speaking too much would make a woman vulgar, as if being loud was a kind of failure. I learned early that being good meant being small. I had dreams, of course I did. Writing mostly. Photographs too. I'd sneak disposable cameras into my room and take photos of shadows on my windowsill, of my own hands holding nothing. I filled journals with poems I never let her read. I told her once over breakfast that I wanted to be a writer. She didn't even look up from her coffee. "That's a hobby," she said, "not a life." So I became someone else. The kind of daughter she could talk about in polite company. The first boy who looked at me like I was more than wallpaper was Richard. He was charming in the way grown men are charming to girls who've never been allowed to shine. He asked questions. He listened. He told me I had a clever mind, a sharp smile. I believed him. We met at a friend's engagement party. He brought me wine, stood too close, asked what I studied. I told him literature. He smiled and said, "Ah, the language of feelings." He made it sound romantic. Now I know it was a red flag. He was 5 years older, more established, confident in a way that made my mother instantly approve. She said, "You won't have to worry about anything with a man like that." And I didn't. Until I did. We married young. I had barely finished school. I thought marriage would be freedom. Instead, it became the most gilded kind of cage. At first, he encouraged my writing, bought me a desk, a typewriter, but soon that desk was moved to make space for a crib, and the typewriter gathered dust while I folded baby clothes and packed lunches. "You're so good at this," he'd say. "Not everyone's cut out for motherhood like you are." What he meant was, stop dreaming, start serving. I did. I dropped the camera, put away the pens. The only stories I told were bedtime ones. The only photos I took were of birthdays and Halloween costumes. I wanted to be everything my mother wasn't: affectionate, present, soft. But I didn't know how to be that without also becoming erased. Richard didn't hit, didn't cheat. He just made sure the world revolved around him. He filled rooms with his voice. He made decisions for me, for us. Always with a smile. Always with logic. "I just think it's best if we wait on that," he'd say when I suggested going back to work. "The kids need you more than some paycheck." "You don't need the stress," he'd say when I wanted to join a local writers group. "You do enough already." It never sounded cruel. It sounded like love. That's how you lose yourself. Slowly, kindly. By the time Henry was in high school, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She looked tidy, gracious, necessary, but not real. Then Kendall came into our lives. At first, I saw her as a spark, smart, stylish, witty. She reminded me of a version of myself I once dreamed I'd become. The woman who made bold choices, who walked into rooms with red lipstick and purpose. But over time, I realized she wasn't a mirror of who I could have been. She was a reflection of my mother. Underneath the polish was the same tightness, the same subtle control. She complimented in the language of condescension. She arranged Henry's calendar without asking. She corrected Lily's tone with a raised eyebrow. And she treated me like a beloved relic, nice to look at, unnecessary to consult. And Henry, my son, my blood, let it happen, just like I let it happen, just like my mother did. 3 generations of women shrinking to fit into the roles written by someone else's hand. I sat in the living room that night, flipping through old albums. There was a picture of my mother and me at my bridal shower. She wore navy silk and a tight smile. I was in ivory, leaning into her, the smile on my face big and bright, and already beginning to crack. The frame was chipped. I hadn't noticed before. A small fracture in the corner, barely visible unless you were looking. I took it out of the frame and turned it over. My mother's handwriting in perfect script, Carol the Bride, 1974. Just my name. Not my daughter. Not my joy. Just an inventory tag. I pulled an old diary from the bookshelf, one I'd hidden behind gardening manuals. Inside were half-finished poems, to-do lists, unsent letters, a version of me that still tried to speak. On one page, dated April 1982, I'd written, "I am the echo of women who never got to speak their own names." I stared at that sentence. It didn't read like grief, it read like warning, and I was done heeding it. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday. The cooking, the warmth, the music in the kitchen, so much effort wrapped in love, but not this year. I wasn't going to go. I told Henry I wasn't feeling well. He didn't buy it. "Just come for a little while," he'd said. Kendall already made the seating chart. That should have told me everything I needed to know. When I arrived, the house smelled like cinnamon and sterile lemon cleaner. Kendall opened the door wearing cream cashmere and a grin just tight enough to draw blood. "There she is," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "We were beginning to think you'd bailed." "I said I'd come," I replied. She murmured, "and we're so glad you did." The table was set with magazine perfection, gold-accented plates, tiny handwritten name cards, matching napkin rings. My seat was at the far end, angled slightly away from the others. Not that anyone noticed. Lily sat to Kendall's right, hair curled, eyes glued to her phone. Henry busied himself carving the turkey, his expression neutral. I smiled through it all. The conversation was already humming when I tried to join it. Kendall was talking about some new yoga instructor, a goddess in Lululemon, and everyone was laughing. "I used to teach yoga," I said quietly. Kendall blinked. "Really?" I nodded. "Just a few community classes, back in the 80s. Kendall laughed, light, dismissive. "That's adorable." I felt Lily glance at me, then quickly back at her screen. Adorable. I kept my smile. When dinner was served, Kendall launched into a speech about gratitude. Her parents were in Hawaii this year, she explained. Honestly, they've earned it. They're not the type to cling to tradition. She looked directly at me when she said it. Forks scraped plates, wine glasses clinked. I listened, ate little. The sweet potatoes were too sweet, the turkey too dry. My plate remained mostly full. Kendall dominated the table like a conductor. She steered every topic, corrected Lily's grammar mid-sentence, gave Henry the look when he went off script. She told a story about their recent kitchen renovation and gestured toward the ceiling. "Mom, tell them how you almost installed the wrong backsplash," she said to me. I blinked. "I didn't choose it," I said. "You did." "Oh, right," she chirped. "You just paid for it." Laughter. Polite, quick. Even Henry smirked. I folded my napkin in half, again and again. At one point, Lily leaned in and whispered, "Gigi, there's lipstick on your teeth." She didn't mean to be cruel, but the way she said it, low, amused, not wanting anyone else to hear, told me she already knew how to cut softly. I excused myself to the bathroom, stared at my reflection for too long. Lipstick smudged, eyes rimmed red. I splashed water on my face, patted dry. When I returned, dessert was already being plated. No one asked if I wanted any. Kendall raised her wine glass. "A toast," she said, standing tall and graceful. "To women who know when to pass the torch. And when to put it out." The table chuckled. My throat tightened. I raised my glass too. Because what else could I do? I left shortly after, citing an early morning. Henry walked me to the door, didn't say much, just hugged me and whispered, "Thanks for coming." That night I couldn't sleep. My body ached from being held so tightly inside itself. I kept replaying the evening like a bad performance. My stories, dismissed. My presence, tolerated. My past, rewritten. And yet I still felt the pull to be gracious, to not make waves, to protect Henry's peace. The next morning, I stopped by their house again. I'd left my scarf draped over a chair. Kendall wasn't home. Henry was upstairs with Lily. The scarf was in the living room. I grabbed it, ready to leave, when I noticed the printer light blinking in the corner. I don't know why I looked. I should have just walked out. But I didn't. The tray held a stack of papers, crisp, fresh, legal formatting. I flipped through the first page and my heart stopped. It was a draft of my will, only it wasn't mine anymore. Everything had been rewritten. Language shifted. Beneficiaries changed. Power of attorney assigned to Kendall, not Henry, Kendall. A section highlighted in yellow. In the event of diminished capacity, immediate transition to assisted care shall be authorized. No signature, no date, but clearly staged, pre-written, prepared. I stood there, frozen, reading my own future, signed away by hands that had no right to it. I put the papers back exactly as I'd found them, left the scarf, and walked out the door. Outside, the sun was too bright, the air too still. My heartbeat pounded in my ears like a warning bell. I had been planning to wait, to be patient, to protect their comfort, but they were already planning to erase me. And that's when I knew Thanksgiving was the last time I would ever sit at that table as a guest in my own life. The call to Willa had been sitting in my mind like a sticky note I kept meaning to throw away. We hadn't spoken in over 20 years, not since Richard's funeral, when she sent a card that said, "You'll survive this, and one day you might even thank the silence." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Now, I wasn't so sure I hadn't. I found her number folded inside a yellowed envelope tucked in the back of my desk. She'd written it down on the inside flap of a thank you note, back when people still did things by hand. When she answered, her voice sounded exactly the same, all gravel and laughter. "Well, damn," she said after I said my name. "I thought you fell into a PTA meeting and never came out." "I think I did," I said. She didn't ask why I was calling. She just said, "Come over." Willa lived in a house that looked like it had refused to be anything but what it wanted. Ivy climbing where it shouldn't, windows painted teal, a rusting wind chime made of spoons swaying near the porch. She opened the door in overalls splattered with dried paint and a scarf wrapped around her wrist. "You look like you need bourbon or vengeance," she said. "Possibly both." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Her kitchen smelled like oranges and turpentine. The walls were covered in paintings, portraits of women with mouths like fire and hands like doors. She poured tea into mismatched mugs and sat across from me with both elbows on the table. "Tell me who hurt you," she said, grinning, but her eyes were serious. I told her everything: Thanksgiving, the lipstick, the will, the draft, Kendall's eyes, Henry's silence, Lily's glance, my own vanishing. Willa didn't flinch. "They've convinced you you're fading," she said, "so they can erase you before you notice you're still here." I sat with that. "They call it love," I whispered. "No," she said. "They call it management. You just mistook the leash for a lifeline." We talked for hours, or maybe just minutes that stretched. At one point, she stood and disappeared down the hall, returning with a red scarf and a pair of boots. "Try these," she said. The boots were leather, cherry red. My size. I pulled them on, unsure. The scarf she tied around my neck like a flight attendant ready to jump ship. I caught my reflection in the oven door, ridiculous, loud, unfamiliar, and for the first time in years, I didn't look invisible. I looked awake. That night, I went home and opened my closet. I took out everything that made me feel like background noise. The beige sweaters, the practical slacks, the scarves Kendall gave me last Christmas, because you're always cold. I folded them all into donation bags. I pulled a box down from the top shelf. A box of things I used to call too much. The emerald blouse from 1994. The heels I wore once to a gallery opening. My first bottle of perfume, still half full. The next morning, I dressed differently. Not for them, for me. Sunlight hit the lipstick tube on my vanity and made it glow. I put it on, not carefully, not modestly, just enough. Outside, I felt the crunch of leaves under my red boots. The wind in my short hair. I'd cut it the day after seeing Willa. The stylist had asked 3 times, "Are you sure?" I was. It wasn't about looking young. It was about shedding weight I didn't ask to carry. At the coffee shop, a man held the door for me and smiled. Not like he wanted something, like he saw something. I smiled back. I brought out my old laptop from the attic. It was dusty and slow, but still worked. I opened a blank document and stared at it for a while. My fingers hovered over the keys. The first sentence came like a cough from an unused throat. She was done apologizing for the noise she made. I wrote for hours, The next day, I went to a bookstore and bought a new journal. Leather-bound, thick pages, a green ribbon to mark where I paused. On the first page, I wrote the title in firm black ink, What I Couldn't Say. I stared at the words for a long time, not sad, not scared, just present. That evening, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror again. This time, my lipstick had smudged a little and my boots were muddy. I looked alive. And for once, that was enough. Malcolm Kane's office smelled like cedar and leather-bound restraint. It wasn't fancy, but it was deliberate. Walls lined with books, a single window that let in just enough light to keep the room from feeling like a confessional. He stood when I entered, tall and angular, his navy blazer too sharp for someone with such warm eyes. "Mrs. Langley," he said, offering his hand. "Please, Carol, right?" I nodded. "Yes, thank you for seeing me." He motioned toward the leather chair opposite his desk. "Of course, your message said it was personal, possibly urgent." I sat. My palms were sweating. My heart wouldn't slow. "I need to make changes to my will," I said, "significant ones." He opened a legal pad, pen poised. "Let's begin." "I want to remove my son," I said. There it was, out loud. "And his wife, and—" I hesitated. "Possibly the granddaughter, too. I haven't decided." Malcolm's pen paused midair. He didn't look surprised, just alert. "Do you have concerns about capacity, safety, manipulation?" "All of the above," I said. "But mostly, clarity. I see them clearly now." He nodded slowly. "We can structure a new estate plan. I'll guide you through disinheritance clauses, updated power of attorney, and trusts. Have you selected new beneficiaries?" "Yes." I took a breath. "Her name is Tess." His eyebrows lifted slightly, not judgmental, curious. "She's a scholarship student at the college," I said. "She works part-time at the bookstore. We met when I left my coat there. She returned it the next day with a handwritten note and a bag of homemade cookies." He smiled. "She reminds me of who I used to be, before silence was expected, before obligation replaced want." Malcolm started writing again. "We'll need her full name and contact details. She doesn't have to know yet, but I'll need her information to establish the trust." We talked logistics, real estate, savings accounts, personal belongings. He moved through everything like a surgeon, precise, clean, practiced. Meanwhile, guilt circled in my chest like a trapped moth. "Can I ask you something?" I said after an hour. He looked up. "Does this make me cruel?" He set down his pen. "No. You didn't hesitate." "I didn't need to. But they're still my family." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Carol, they don't get to own the rest of your story. Loving people doesn't mean surrendering the pen." I swallowed hard. "They think I'm losing my grip." "Then let's make sure what you leave behind can't be twisted into something you never meant." He handed me a new folder, blank, labeled Langley Trust Draft. "I'll have the final version by next week. When you sign, bring someone you trust. No family, just clarity." I nodded. "Thank you." As I stood to leave, he added, "And Carol, choosing peace isn't betrayal, it's defense." I stepped into the hallway feeling lighter and heavier all at once. That night, I pulled the old will from the fireproof box. It was Richard's original, updated once after Lily was born. Colton was executor back then. Kendall had pushed for that. I held it in my hands. The paper felt thick with years, with assumptions. And then, without ceremony, I tore it in half, then in quarters, then smaller still. I dropped the pieces into the fireplace, lit a single match, and watched the pages curl and blacken. The flame hissed once, then rose, bold and unapologetic. This was my beginning, not theirs. The next day, Tess met me for coffee. I hadn't told her yet, just asked if she had time between work and class. She showed up breathless, her backpack slung over one shoulder, cheeks flushed from the cold. "You okay?" she asked, brushing hair from her face. "You sounded different." "I am," I said. "A little." She smiled. "Good." We talked about her classes, her favorite professor, the poem she couldn't stop thinking about. I didn't mention the will. Not yet. Not today. Today, I just wanted to sit across from someone who saw me as a person, not a relic, not an obstacle. As we stood to leave, I touched her hand. "Thank you," I said, "for reminding me I still get to matter." That evening, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Lily stood there, hair down, no makeup, no phone in hand. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice too small for someone who'd grown into such a sharp silhouette. I nodded. She stepped inside like a child afraid of waking ghosts. "I found something," she said. "In Mom's files, on the printer." I didn't speak. "I know what it is," she said. "I know what they were planning." I sat down, watching her carefully. She stayed standing. "You changed your will, didn't you?" "Yes." She hesitated. "Are we the villains in your story?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, really looked. The trace of the girl who used to braid my hair, the one who read on my lap, still faintly visible under the sharp edges Kendall had carved. "I don't need villains," I said. "I need distance." Lily's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why her? The bookstore girl?" I stood, walked to the window, and pulled aside the curtain. "She listens," I said. "Not out of duty, not for performance, just because she wants to." Lily nodded. "Will you tell them?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, that's your truth, not mine to carry." When she left, I sat in the dark for a long time, heart beating fast, not from fear, from release. She came back the next day. No announcement, no call, just a knock, 3 soft raps like a memory trying not to disturb the air. I opened the door and found Lily on the porch, holding 2 coffees in trembling hands. "I didn't know what kind you liked," she said, "so I guessed." I stepped aside, let her in. No words, just the silence that fills a space when something is about to shift. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place I'd taught her to count using buttons, the same table she once covered in glitter and glue when she made me Gigi's greatest grandma cards. Now she held her cup like it might explain things if she gripped it tightly enough. "I read some of the will," she said. I didn't flinch. "And I saw your name on the draft," I said quietly. "Did it surprise you?" She nodded. "It did." We both sipped at the same time, as if rehearsed. Then she said it. The question I didn't expect her to ask twice. "Are we the villains?" I looked at her, truly looked. No longer a girl, not yet a woman. Still pliable, but starting to harden in all the wrong places. "No," I said. "But you've been standing too close to people who forgot how to be human." Her eyes didn't drop. That surprised me. "I didn't see it," she admitted. "The way Mom talks to you, the way we all just let her." I nodded slowly. "It's not about one comment," I said, "or one dinner. It's about the erosion. Small pieces chipped away until the whole shape changes and no one remembers what it used to be." "I remember some things," she whispered. I stood up, crossed to the living room, and pulled the old photo album off the shelf. The one with the blue leather cover and frayed binding. I slid it across the table toward her. She opened it carefully like it might fall apart. Photos of her as a baby, me holding her in oversized glasses, both of us laughing. A Halloween where I was a witch and she a lion cub. Her hands on my cheeks, eyes wide. "I forgot these," she said. I didn't. Next, I pulled my journal from the shelf. Not what I couldn't say, not that one. A different one, older, softer. One I used to keep before I stopped believing my thoughts mattered. She flipped through pages of cursive and chaos. Notes in the margins, scraps of poetry, grocery lists mixed with confessions. "This is yours?" she asked. "It was," I said, before I gave myself away. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. "I wish I'd known you better," she said, "before I became like her." "You don't have to stay like her," I said. She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she said. Not loud, not performative. Just 3 words laid down like a first stone in a new path. I nodded, feeling something in my chest soften, not break. "I forgive you," I said, "but I'm not stepping back into the fire." She looked confused. "You're always welcome here," I continued, "but I won't go back to pretending your mother's cruelty is love." Lily nodded, slowly, processing, respectful. "I don't think I want to be like her," she said. "Not anymore." "Then don't," I said. "It's not too late." She ran her fingers over the photo album. "Do you hate her?" she asked. "No," I said. "I mourn her. That's different." The room fell quiet again. After a long while, she asked, "Will you tell me more? About you? Before?" I stood, walked to the cupboard, pulled down 2 mismatched mugs and poured fresh tea. "I was a girl who wrote poems on receipts," I said. "I used to take pictures of empty park benches and make up stories about who had just left." She smiled. "I used to believe love meant being needed," I added. "Now I know it means being safe." Lily looked down. "I don't know how to fix what we did." "You don't need to," I said. "You just need to choose something else moving forward." She took a deep breath, then said, "Would it be okay if I came by again?" "Yes," I said, "but not to pretend. If you come here, you come real." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It was the first time she'd touched me in years. "Love doesn't mean returning to abuse," I said. "It means learning to love yourself enough to leave it." She nodded. "Then maybe I've got some learning to do." We finished our tea in silence. And when she left, I didn't cry. I stood by the window, watching her walk back to her car. For the first time in years, she looked back and waved. And for the first time, I waved back without longing. Only hope. It started with the drawer under the stairs. I hadn't opened it in years, didn't need to. It was the graveyard of just-in-case things. Expired insurance policies, old greeting cards, 2 pairs of reading glasses that no longer matched my prescription. And in the very back, a weathered envelope, thick and yellowing. The will Richard and I signed in 2001. The letter from Kendall asking me to consider power of delegation, a notarized copy of my medical directive, birthday cards with fake affection, holiday thank yous from people who no longer made room for my voice. I carried it all outside. The fire pit in the backyard hadn't been used in years. It took me longer than I'd admit to get it going. Matches, kindling, stubborn wood. But once it caught, the flames were sharp and greedy. They seemed to know what I was asking of them. One by one, I fed the pages to the fire. First, the old will. I tore it into thirds, then into ribbons, watching each strip curl into smoke. Next, the birthday cards. "Hope you're doing well. All the best." I read them aloud before burning them, each one a relic of performative care. The envelope from Kendall was last, her handwriting, tight, expensive, calculated. Inside, a printout of Power of Attorney FX, and a sticky note that said, "Just a suggestion, for peace of mind." I tossed it in whole. As the flames rose, I stood barefoot on the cold ground, the dusk light bleeding pink and amber through the trees. My feet sank into the dirt. The heat touched my face like breath. I didn't cry. It wasn't grief. It was release. Back inside, I turned on music. Folk songs, women with gravel in their throats and fire in their bellies. I danced alone, in the living room, arms high, mouth open, breath ragged. Not to impress, not to forget. Just to move, just to feel. That night, I journaled longer than I had in weeks. I don't owe them my stillness. Not anymore. The next morning, I joined the circle. It met twice a month in the basement of a repurposed church just outside town. No religious ceremony, no pretense. Just women, gray-haired, scarred, wide-eyed, wide-mouthed, telling stories the world had asked them to bury. Willa had invited me. "You'll like these women," she'd said. "They've stopped apologizing." There were 8 of us that night. Donna had left her husband after 40 years. Eileen had raised 5 children who now called once a year. Patrice used to be a courtroom stenographer. "I recorded men for a living," she said with a wry smile. Now I listened to myself. They didn't flinch when I told them about Kendall, about Henry, about Lily, about the will. They nodded, listened. One reached out and touched my wrist when I paused. "It's not your fault," she said. "It's your story, and you get to own it now." That moment was church. Later that week, I drove to the cabin, the one I hadn't visited since Richard died. We used to call it our escape, but it had never really been mine until now. It sat on the edge of a lake no one visited, shielded by trees and time. The porch sagged slightly. The windows needed cleaning. But the silence welcomed me like an open palm. Inside, dust danced in the air like ghosts waiting for permission to leave. I opened every window, lit candles, dragged the sheets off the furniture, and shook them out onto the grass. Scrubbed the floor until it stopped feeling like memory and started feeling like potential. This wasn't just a getaway, this was sanctuary. I stayed for 3 days, rode every morning, walked along the lake every afternoon, cooked simply rice, beans, soup, lit fires in the evening, and sat with my notebook on my lap, feet curled under me, voice finally my own again. On the third night, I fell asleep without locking the door, not because I forgot, because I wasn't afraid. I returned to town on a Tuesday, picked up groceries, watered my plants, opened my mail. That's when I found it. A letter, thick paper, legal watermark, from Kendall. I opened it slowly, hands calm even before I knew what it would say. Inside, accusations. She was challenging the new will, claiming I lacked consistent mental clarity. Attached was a notarized letter, likely typed by her friend at the law firm, suggesting I had exhibited signs of cognitive instability and was highly susceptible to undue influence. She was calling me unstable, unfit. She was trying to undo my autonomy before I'd even died. I read it twice, then again. Then I folded it gently, placed it in a drawer, and wrote 2 words in my journal. Let her. Because I wasn't afraid of the fight anymore. Because I had witnesses now. Paper trails, dates, people, and a fire inside me that had survived colder things than Kendall. I would take this to court if needed. I would sit on that stand and say every word I'd once been too polite to say. But first, I made tea, wrapped myself in a quilt, and stepped onto my porch to watch the sun disappear behind the trees. This fire? This one was mine. The courtroom smelled of varnish and tension, old wood, new lies. Fluorescent lights flickered just enough to make everything feel colder than it was. I sat at the petitioner's table, Malcolm beside me, calm and precise. His legal pad was open, a pen resting across it, like a weapon waiting to be drawn. Across the aisle, Kendall adjusted the collar of her tailored blazer. Her lips were glossed, her heels too high for comfort. She looked like someone posing for a picture she assumed she would win. Henry sat next to her, hands folded, gaze unfixed. His face held the expression of a man who had long ago decided not to pick sides, only to drown between them. The clerk called the case. I didn't flinch. This wasn't the story of a frail woman in decline. This was the story of a woman who had finally stood up. The judge, gray hair, steady voice, reviewed the complaint. A challenge to the legitimacy of a revised will, citing suspected cognitive decline and undue influence. Kendall's attorney spoke first, her voice smooth, practiced. We have concern, Your Honor, that Mrs. Langley, now in her late 60s, has been manipulated by a much younger individual, Tess Morgan, a college student with no familial connection, into restructuring her estate in a way that undermines long-standing familial precedent. Manipulated, I muttered under my breath. Malcolm touched my arm gently, signaling patience. The judge raised an eyebrow. You're asserting that the new beneficiary exerts undue influence? Yes, the lawyer said, and that Mrs. Langley has demonstrated inconsistent memory, irrational hostility toward family, and an alarming withdrawal from prior obligations. I kept my hands folded, steady. It was my turn soon. Malcolm stood next. Your Honor, my client has lived a lifetime of silent servitude. This new will was not written in haste or confusion, but in clarity, and we have witnesses. The judge gestured. Let's proceed. I rose slowly, every joint deliberate, every breath my own. I unfolded a piece of paper from my purse and held it with both hands. My voice trembled at first, but only from the weight of what I was about to reclaim. I am not fading, I began. I am freeing. Kendall shifted in her seat. I am not confused. I am not broken. I am not lost. I am reclaiming the chapters of my life that I was too polite to write until now. The courtroom was silent. For decades, I served others while they took pieces of me without asking. I smiled through dismissals. I nodded through condescension. I said thank you when they moved my voice to the background and called it care. I looked directly at the judge. My mind is not in question, but my tolerance for being managed is. Malcolm nodded slowly. The judge gave no visible reaction, but his fingers stopped tapping. I changed my will because I finally remembered that legacy isn't about blood. It's about truth. I sat down. No one moved. Then Malcolm stood again. We call Tess Morgan. Tess entered with quiet confidence. Jeans, sweater, backpack still slung over one shoulder. She took the stand, looked straight ahead, unshaken. "I met Carol Langley a year ago," she said. "I returned her coat to a bookstore she forgot it in. She wrote me a thank you note. I didn't think she'd remember me after that." She paused, then continued. "But she did." I watched Kendall roll her eyes. The judge noticed. Tess continued. "She started checking in, brought me soup when I had the flu, sat with me during midterms, but she never once asked for anything. No strings, no conditions." She looked at me and smiled. "She told me once that she used to write poetry. I asked why she stopped. She said she forgot she had anything worth saying. So I told her to start again." The courtroom softened. "She gave me a journal," Tess said, "and I gave her one back. She's not confused. She's inspired. And for the first time, I think, she's living." The judge thanked her. She stepped down. Kendall's lawyer tried to cross-examine, but there was nothing to shake. Tess was too rooted in her own truth to sway. The judge reviewed the documents, asked a few clarifying questions, then leaned forward. "I see no signs of coercion or confusion in Mrs. Langley's testimony or documentation. The new will reflects a clear, consistent, and lawful choice." Kendall's lips parted. A breath caught. Not grief, shock. "Petition to revoke the revised will is denied," the judge said. "Mrs. Langley's estate shall remain as she has dictated." The gavel fell. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. When I opened them, Henry was looking at me for the first time in months. Not as a mother, not as a problem, as a woman. He didn't say anything, neither did I. Kendall didn't meet my gaze. She packed her purse slowly, fingers stiff, a smudge of lipstick on her teeth. Tess walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder. "You were brilliant," she said. "No," I said. I was finally honest. Outside in the courthouse hallway, I walked alone toward the glass doors, each step louder than the one before. At the exit, I paused, looked up at the sky, and smiled. Not big, not wide, but with certainty. This wasn't revenge, it was resurrection. And I was only just getting started. I lit 3 candles, not for ambiance, for ritual, one for who I was, one for who I pretended to be, and one for who I'd finally become. The journal sat in front of me like an old friend I was ready to say goodbye to. What I couldn't say was now filled edge to edge. Every page inked with truth I once thought too dangerous to name. Tonight I would read them, out loud, for no one but myself. The first letter was to Richard. "Dear Richard, you loved me quiet. You praised my restraint like it was virtue, like my silence was your crown. You told everyone I was steady. I wasn't, I was shrinking. I stood by you not because you deserved it, but because I didn't believe I deserved anything else. You gave me a house. I made it a home. You gave me children. I made them strong. But you never gave me space. I used to wonder if that was love. Now I know it wasn't. You loved me quiet. I loved me loud." I folded the page, carried it outside, and lit a match. The flame took its time, curling around the words before swallowing them whole. I watched until it was ash, not grief, not hate, just the end of pretending. Back inside, I turned the page. The second letter was to Kendall. "Kendall, you were never subtle. You disguised dominance as charm, control as care. Your words were weapons dressed in silk. I know now you didn't inherit cruelty. You chose it. Politeness doesn't mask contempt. Not really. Not for long. I don't owe you forgiveness. I owe myself distance. You taught me how to vanish in plain sight. But you also taught me how to return, so thank you. For that." The next letter was shorter, harder. To Henry. "Henry, you saw it. You heard the things she said, watched how she moved me like a chess piece, and you didn't stop her. You let me become invisible to keep your peace. I don't hate you, but I no longer protect you from the truth. You were my son, but I don't belong to you anymore." I wiped my eyes, not because they begged, because the letting go was real. Then the final letter. To myself, Carol. You were not too much. You were too quiet in a world that demanded you stay silent. You were not wrong to want. You were wrong to wait. You thought you had to earn rest. You don't. You thought love had to come with sacrifice. It doesn't. You carried them for decades. Now carry yourself. You are not ruined. You are rewritten. I closed the journal, ran my hand over the leather cover one last time, then whispered to the room, not for drama, but for truth. This isn't bitterness. It's birth. And in that moment, I felt it. Not freedom from the past, but permission to finally move beyond it. The scholarship fund was Tess's idea. "I don't want what you gave me to stop with me," she said. "Let's pass it on." So we opened an account under the name the Langley Fund, a scholarship for women over 50 returning to school after years spent raising others, surviving others, shrinking for others. We made flyers, contacted the local college. The applications started coming in faster than we expected. One woman had dropped out of college in 1987 to care for her father. Another had left school when she got pregnant at 17 and never went back. Another wrote simply, "I want to learn without having to apologize for being here." We funded 5 women that year. The program grew like a houseplant that had just been given sunlight. The night of the reading came in late spring, a benefit event. Modest room, folding chairs, string lights hung across the ceiling like whispers. Tess introduced me from a mic that squeaked twice before settling. Her voice was steady. "And now," she said, "I'd like to introduce the woman whose story inspired all of this. Carol Langley, founder of the Langley Fund, former shadow, current sun." Laughter rippled, not at me, with me. I walked to the podium, wearing the lipstick Kendall once mocked, a coral red shade that caught the light and stayed on the rim of my water glass like a signature. The title of the piece was written in bold on the first page, "Liability in Lipstick." I looked out at the crowd, dozens of eyes waiting. Some I knew, some I didn't. Malcolm sat in the second row, suit clean, smile easy. Willa next to him, her scarf knotted like armor, eyes shining. Tess, front and center, holding a pen like it was holy. I took a breath and began to read. They called her impractical, emotional, too fragile for decisions, too loud for comfort, too vibrant to be useful. They called her a liability, but never a legacy. They dressed their cruelty in concern, called their control love. She smiled through dinners where her presence was tolerated, not invited, until one day she looked in the mirror and remembered her name. The room held its breath. I read every word, clear, slow, unapologetic. She didn't rewrite the rules. She burned the script. She became her own heir. When I finished, there was no immediate applause, only silence, a silence that felt earned. And then, clapping, not polite, not tentative, real. It rolled through the room like thunder. Some stood, some wiped eyes, some reached for the hands beside them. When I stepped down, Willa hugged me first. "You didn't read," she whispered. "You resurrected." Malcolm kissed my hand. "You signed your name with fire." Tess just cried, then pulled me into her arms. We posed for a photo beside the podium. My lipstick still clung to the glass beside the mic. I didn't wipe it off. I wanted it there. I stepped outside for air. The sun had started to set, but not without a fight. The sky burned orange and gold. I stood on the steps, arms loose at my sides, no longer bracing for disappointment. That's when I saw him. Henry. He stood a few yards away, hands in his pockets, hair slightly messier than I remembered. No Kendall, no scripts, just him. He didn't speak at first, just walked forward, slow and uncertain. "I read your story," he said. "Tess sent it." I nodded, said nothing. "It was you," he added. "All of it." "Yes." He looked down, swallowed hard. "I let her do it," he said finally. "All those years, I let her decide how you should fit into our lives. I didn't even notice you stopped fitting." I didn't correct him, because he was right. He looked up again. "Is there still a way back?" His voice wasn't the confident bass of courtroom indifference. It was a boy's voice, a son's voice, a man who knew he'd lost something and didn't know if it could be rebuilt. I studied him, the lines in his face, the hope behind the shame. "I don't know," I said honestly. He nodded slowly. "Fair. But I know you can try." His shoulders eased just slightly. "Start with Lily," I said. "She's softer than you think." He smiled faintly. "She always liked you better. She still might." He turned to go, then paused. "I was proud of you in there," he said. "Then stop hiding from the parts of me you didn't understand," I replied. He nodded again. "I'll try." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. I walked back into the building, my smile steady. Not for Henry, not even for Tess, for me. Because I had inherited something no one could contest. My voice. and I wasn't done speaking yet. The lake was still that morning, glass-like, unmoved, as if it knew this was goodbye. I stood in the doorway of the cabin, coffee in hand, blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the water hold the sky. The wind lifted the curtains behind me like a breath exhaled gently, as if even the house was sighing. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was full. Inside, the fire had burned low, just the occasional crackle beneath a bed of red coals. My journal waited on the table, open to the final page. The pen sat next to it, poised but patient. I hadn't written in a week, not because I was stuck, because I was full. There are some stories you don't rush, you live them, you let them arrive when they're ready. And now, I was ready. I sat down, pulled the blanket tighter around my legs, and picked up the pen. Final entry. I am not a liability, I am legacy. Not because of what I gave, but because I reclaimed what was taken. I am not who they said I was. I am not unfinished. I am not fading. I'm here. Entire. Enough. I closed the journal with both hands. Let them rest on the cover for a long time. The sunlight stretched across the floor, slow and gold, pooling at my bare feet. I stood, placed the journal back on the shelf beside the first one. What I couldn't say. Now weathered, spine soft with use. Next to it, I placed the lipstick tube. Same one Kendall had mocked. A liability in lipstick, she'd called me. And yet, it was the color I wore when I saved myself. I stepped outside, the wood of the porch warm from morning sun. My bare feet touched each board like punctuation. The breeze tugged at my sleeves, and somewhere in the trees, a bird called twice and fell quiet. I walked to the edge of the lake. The water lapped gently at the shore, calm and constant. I stepped in, cool at first, then soothing, up to my ankles, my calves, my knees. I stopped when it reached my waist, closed my eyes, tilted my face toward the sky, and breathed. Not survival, not endurance, but presence, full, sacred, whole. A voice stirred in my mind. Not Richard's, not Kendall's, not even Henry's. My own. Family doesn't end in blood. It ends where love stops. I whispered it again, just for me. The wind carried the words somewhere I couldn't see. Back at the cabin, everything remained untouched. The blanket on the chair, the coffee on the table, the lipstick tube beside the journal. Not a symbol, not a rebellion. Just a memory of a woman who finally saw herself and didn't look away. And in that stillness, in that final light, the story didn't end. It opened. A life reclaimed, a voice unburied, a mirror unbroken, and a woman finally her own. If this story made you feel seen, ask yourself, whose voice have you silenced, including your own? Every legacy begins with one brave truth told aloud. Keep listening, keep remembering, and most of all, keep choosing yourself. Because silence has echoes, but stories have power.